Okay, so what are we going to talk about today? Well, we're going to be talking about incorporating inclusion into your communication strategy. And this is part of our masterclass series. Make sure you go to our website, internationalbunch.com/resources, and you'll see in there that there are videos for you to watch as well, and other helpful hints and tips that we do, and then also our webinar schedule so you can see what's coming up. If there's anything that you want us to cover, something that's trending in the industry at the moment, something that you want to have more information on, then just let us know, because we're more than happy to create content that you need and that you want. Okay, so we're now going to move on. Now, as I mentioned before, if you have any questions or any queries at all, please do pop them in the chat box and we'll talk about those at the end. Everyone is muted automatically because this is a webinar program. If you do want to reach out and connect with me directly, no problem at all, please do that. If you don't know myself, my name is Lou Peck. I am the Managing Director of the International Bunch. I've been in the academic and scholarly communications industry for around 19 years. And I've worked with a number of secondary and primary publishers, as well as intermediaries, so those that sit between publishers and libraries. If there's anything I can help you with, give me a shout. But what we want to be talking about today in this masterclass is understanding inclusivity. And we're also going to be looking about the social model of disability. Now, this is something I hadn't heard so much about until recently, when we started doing research on this topic. And I was speaking to a colleague of mine in the industry who has a wheelchair. And so he actually is featured in this masterclass, and he brought the social model of disability to my attention, and it's really interesting. So a different way of thinking, and it's a better way of thinking. It's also about how can you make your content accessible. So we're going to give you some hints and tips that we're going to cover as well. Right, and then we're going to look at some examples of where maybe some marketers could have done a bit better. And then, of course, the Q&A. All right, so the first thing we want to talk about is understanding inclusivity. Now, we know that inclusivity and diversity are high on the agendas of many organizations, but we can talk about how are we looking after our teams, our staff internally, but also how are we communicating to our audiences, to the communities that we work with. Now, even though this is back in 2007, Michael had produced a paper about diversity marketing and cultural awareness, and this has been cited all over the place and is still incredibly relevant today. And Michael has said, if your customers are different than you and they feel unrecognized, you will begin to lose them. Now, that really resonated with me, and something that I'll always talk to people about is each person, we are individual, we are unique in ourselves and everything that we bring to the table. No one can replicate the interactions that we have. No one can replicate exactly who we are. So in actual fact, in terms of when I look at this from Michael, everyone is different and everyone is unique and brings something special to the table. So this is something that is incredibly important, that we do need to be considering how different everyone is and how unique we all are. Now, another example that I want to give you here is Salesforce have done a really great definition about inclusive marketing. Now, Salesforce defines inclusive marketing as creating content that truly reflects the diverse communities that our companies serve. It means that we are evaluating diverse voices and role models, decreasing cultural bias, and leading positive social change through thoughtful and respectful content. And I really like that last bit about thoughtful and respectful content. As marketers, we're very busy, we have to write a lot of copy sometimes, but we want to make sure that it resonates. Now, we did a storytelling webinar recently, which you'll find on our website. It's also on our YouTube channel. And that's a really great place for you to go to if you're doing a lot of copywriting, And so, you know, part of that is thinking about how can you be thoughtful and respectful in what you're writing, in what your output is. So I wanted to put into context around what the landscape is, what the lay of the land is. So some of these percentages that I'm going to cover now, you know, they're quite high, and this just really demonstrates the importance. So 71% of people with disabilities who have accessibility issues leave your website if it's difficult to use. I mean, how accessible is your website right now? I mean, we could all probably go through this process of looking at our web accessibility. 82% of people with access needs would spend more money online if websites were more accessible. 82%. You know, those two figures that I've just mentioned so far, they're in their own, well, they are around the 3/4 mark. That's just staggering. 92% are more likely to support a business which is physically and digitally accessible. So it just shows you how important this is. 70%, there has been a 70% increase in mobile screen reader use since 2011. And my goodness, we know how quickly technology advances. So it must be just the increase of use and also the staggering technological advances that must have happened for a person who may have had a disability. So that content is more accessible, but there is more that we can be doing. 54% of adults with a disability will go online. 54%. And 90% of websites are inaccessible for those who rely on assistive technology. 90%. I mean, how accessible is, let's say, if you're a publisher right now, because I know we have a number of publishers who've signed up to this webinar, how many of your platforms are accessible? There's something that when I years ago, I am talking like probably back in like 2004, something like that. I can't even remember, it was such a long time ago. When I worked at British Standards Institution, we actually had a web accessibility expert that came in. And one of the things that they showed us at the time was if you had to navigate around a website with just a button that you would hit your head with, and it acted as a tab to go through the site, and you needed to get to a certain part of the web page, how many times would you have to hit your head on that pad to get down there? So that's literally, if you go to a website, and you can try this today, and you use your tab button, and it'll tab you through to the places where there are links. How many times do you have to click that to get to a specific call to action? So how many times does that person who has a specific disability that prevents them from using their arms or their hands or their feet or their legs or anything like that, they have to use their head? 15% of people have a disability, and that could affect how they browse the web. So that is 15% of the population have a disability that could affect how they browse the web. So I just wanted to leave that one with you. And of course, we're not always, when we're looking at inclusive language, referring to someone having a specific disability. It's more than that. But I do want to talk about disabilities here because it's for some of my examples. So Jason, who I met recently through a friend of mine, and he's a marketing and inclusion consultant. And you can see there's a picture of Jason here. He's sitting in what I assume to be a garden in his wheelchair, looking really smart. So there's a couple of things that Jason had talked to me about. And one of the things was about the social model of disability and how incredibly important it is, and how we perceive and how we communicate about disability. So basically what he says here is that the social model of disability is the opposite to the medical model. The social model says society and the barriers that exist in society is what disables people. So, for example, if you think of a building that prevents a person in a wheelchair from entering the building, well, when we look at the social model, then the the way that we address that is that there is a ramp that helps that person to access that building, to make it more accessible. It's the building that has the issue, not the person. So the medical model says that a person's impairment or illness is what disables them. And you know, that's quite a statement made. That's quite clinical, that's quite cold. So the social model of disability is actually has been created by people that have disabilities. So he says, once you've learned about that, once you've looked at that, then the next best step that you can do is to look for ableist language replacements. And so that's what I would absolutely recommend for you to do. And one of the links that we're going to make available to you is some example links that Jason had given to us. And then also, finally, what Jason summarizes is that the main important thing right now is how we talk about disability, and then avoiding harmful and offensive language. Now, one other big thing that Jason does want to mention that ties into the social model is that person with disability, or people with disability, or people with disabilities, that is generally the way that you would talk more inclusively. So rather than saying a blind man, then you would say a man that is blind, or a person that is blind. So person first language is a way that you need to be thinking, and it is a huge topic of discussion. Okay, so thanks so much, Jason, for your input into this. So just touching on what Jason talked about, the social model of disability. Now, as I talked about the medical model of disability, that looks at what is wrong with the person. I mean, what is wrong with the person, not what does that person need? So think about that example I gave you around a building and a ramp. So how can we make the content, how can we make somewhere more accessible? So the social model of disability is looking at the barriers around that prevent someone from doing something. And if you look at this in your day-to-day environment, in your work environment, it's a bit like looking at agile marketing and saying, what are the blockers that are stopping me from moving forward? How can I empower and enable myself to move forward and to continue doing the work that I need to do and the tasks that I need to do? So it's looking at society and looking at the social barriers, whatever they may be, whether they are physical barriers, whether they're to do with the organization that you're in, whether it's to do with attitudes. But here we're talking about communication. So hopefully looking at the social model of disability is going to give you a mindset change. Now, what we want to look at now is how can you make your content accessible? And we're going to give you a number of hints here. Earlier today, we also added a web accessibility checklist to our website. And that gives you a guidance in terms of what you can look at a website, because I'm not going to go into that in detail. I want to kind of keep this light so that you've got some really good take homes that you can say, is there a change that we can do right now? Is there something that I can change right now that is going to have an impact? So it's, first of all, I want you to be thinking about the what and the how. So diversity more focuses about the what, whereas inclusivity focuses more about the how. How do we make someone inclusive? The what, the diversity is around, you know, what makes us diverse, and so how can we make sure that everyone is inclusive? Then we want to be looking at how to understand your audience. Now, in a number of trainings that we do and these webinars and our hints and tips videos, we talk about targeting your niche audience, making sure that when you're looking to do your marketing, that you're being really effective in terms of how best you're engaging with your audience. Now, with inclusivity, of course, you can still target specific audiences, but you just need to broaden your idea and your mindset about what exactly and who exactly, most importantly, is in that audience. So you need to understand their needs. You need to understand their wants, what are their thoughts and their pain points, whether it's librarians, researchers, authors. You want to think about people first. So we talk about that earlier, where we talked about a people first language, and objectives second. What describes them second. You really want to be able to communicate clearly and resonate. Now, resonating, that very much goes with the storytelling webinar that I referenced earlier. So you really want to help people visualize themselves in your content. And when I say visualize, it goes beyond the fact of looking at something with your eyes. It's how someone may visualize that in their mind if they don't have sight. You want to widen your message and allow it to resonate with as many people as possible. You want it to be able to inspire and motivate. Something that you can start doing is start thinking about how you can start writing globally. So what I mean by that is you could think about your global audience rather than your regional specific audience. Because we live in a multicultural society and there are people of all different backgrounds all over the world living in different countries, you'll actually find that you are already communicating to an incredibly diverse background. So think a bit more globally when you're writing and focus on their interests and not on the benefits. Two other statistics I just want to talk about here is that 65% thought marketing and advertising fails to recognize the full range of lives and experiences of people across the country. Now, this came from a Marketing Week survey, which is a UK publication, but it was really interesting. And it's thought that actually this kind of percentage could be easily replicated throughout the world in other countries. So 65% thought marketing and advertising fails to recognize the diversity that we have. 64% of consumers took an action after seeing an ad they considered to be diverse or inclusive. And so that just shows the importance of thinking in a more inclusive way. And remember, if you have any questions, please do add them in. If you're streaming in and watching this from our YouTube channel, because I can tell that we've got people watching this as well, then do add questions and comments into the box on there and we'll answer them as well. Okay, so some additional hints and tips. These are some actions that you can take now. So hopefully they'll be good food for thought for you. So formatting the text is a great way of you to be able to highlight specific call outs or calls to actions, use things like bolding text, or look at using italics as well, or as I've done here, highlighting. There is also later on today on our website going to be some additional information about other things that you could be thinking about doing as well, which just goes into a bit more detail. You can split up sentences into smaller blocks. I often see when we're doing analysis for one of our publishers, for example, and we're looking at competitor publisher sites and we're looking at the journal pages, about how sometimes the length of the sentences can be really long-winded, and actually just break it down to be smaller. And that isn't just because we're talking about having a more inclusive approach here, but it's also because you want the sentences to resonate more. So you're actually able to really have much more impactful text. Talk about they instead of he or she. Don't use click here. I mean, that is a big no-no from all the research that we did around certainly web accessibility. Don't write click here. And if you are doing that, just look to phase that out. So also be mindful about having too many links. Remember, I talked earlier about the example with someone who has to use their head to navigate through a website or a web page. And so that's the tab feature. If you have so many links in there, they're going to have to hit their head on that pad a lot of times to be able to get to where they need to. And you may also increase the chances of ending up with broken links. First, so person first language, really important. Keeps the individual as the most essential element. So I gave an example of this earlier, but instead of saying a man who is blind, you say a man who is blind instead of saying a blind man, or instead of saying a female engineer, you can say a woman on an engineering team. But also, one of the best things to do is just avoid characteristics like religion, race, gender, sexual orientation, and ability as well. Now, regional language, and I'm going to give some examples of these, and jargon and acronyms can exclude people. So where possible, try not to use them. Think about how the language may translate. Now, for acronyms, of course, and abbreviations, do explain them at the beginning, because that will just ensure that the people that are reading that really understand it. But there may be some terms that you don't need to, like ebooks or email, things like that. What I tend to find as a good rule of thumb is that when a word goes into the Oxford Dictionary, for me, that becomes a way that I might write it. So I won't, for example, use e-books, I'll do ebooks. I won't do e-mail, I'll do email. Screen readers, they can really find it hard to read text and images. Now, we're also going to be touching on this in the information that we're going to be putting on the website as well. So it's really important that you do add alternative text to your images, so the screen readers can read that. If you've got a social media image that's really impactful, and it's very much driven around the visual side of it, then that could be a real problem for a screen reader. Use diverse imagery where possible, and I don't just mean diverse imagery around people from different ethnic backgrounds. I mean people from all different walks of life in all different situations. So it's thinking a bit beyond the ethnic backgrounds. People sell to people, not companies to people. I say this all the time. So this is more to do with the fact that as a person, when you come across as being more personable, you'll resonate more. And companies tend to be quite faceless. So it's the people inside the companies that make the difference and make the impact. So using more inclusive communications and using more inclusive imagery also helps to resonate. A picture says 1,000 words. Now, I had also spoken to a librarian industry colleague of mine, and she has Usher syndrome. And these are some of the points that she had said, or they're included in here. But she said what would be most helpful is like a detailed description of what the presenter is explaining and what the information, what is it in trying to convey. So when I'm presenting to you now, and if you noticed, and you may not have done, but I talked about a picture of Jason, and I talked about the fact that he was in the garden, or what I thought was a garden, and that he was sitting in his wheelchair and he looked smart, etc. So I wanted to give you more of an idea if you weren't able to look at Jason, so that you could visualize that in your mind. And you know, that's important when you're looking at bar charts and graphs, for example. If you need to watch someone do something, back it up by an audio description for visually impaired people. That is incredibly important. If you look back on your content, let's say your video content that you may have, have you paid attention to your captions that YouTube, for example, will create? If not, maybe that's something that you could do, is look through the quality of what it is transcribed your video to be, or add in the script into your video channel. Just make sure that there is another accessible way of accessing the content. For example, in our Done in 60 Seconds podcast, we actually put the transcribed text inside the description for the podcast. So if you're unable to hear it, you can actually read it. Hearing about people's experiences needs to be backed up by inclusive action. So this is just going on from what we talked about earlier. Let's listen to Miss Jones talking in this podcast, but it needs to have the full transcript or the subtitles that are made available for anyone who needed it. Think about using different words. So this is more about when you're saying words like let's hear, listen to, as we just talked about. It's thinking about maybe you should say things like explore or discover as different words, just thinking in a more inclusive way. And it's funny because I myself have always tried to steer away from using words like see and hear, and have tried to use and come up with explore and discover. And actually it can be quite difficult because, you know, there's only so many explores and discovers that you can use. And then it's trying to think of other words that sound exciting. But I actually spoke to a number of people about this and said, you know, if as someone that as a person that's in a wheelchair, are you bothered by the fact that someone say, let's go for a walk? And, you know, it's like Jason said to me, no, that doesn't bother me, but I would personally, when I'm communicating something like that, be conscious of it and not write it. And my librarian colleague who has Usher's syndrome, she said, I wouldn't be bothered if I saw, hear or listen. Actually, sometimes it acts as a call to action, so she's more aware about it. But it is something that we can certainly address and make sure that we are being more inclusive, because I think that's something that just everyone's begun to understand and recognize as being the norm, and that doesn't mean that it should be the norm. So Jason gave me an example, and he said, instead of saying watching, he would probably say something like, thanks for following along. I myself have for years said the word guys, hey guys, how are you guys? And now actually I've realized that I should say hey folks, because, you know, guys generally means is more gender specific when I don't use it like that. But actually, for my own learning, I need to talk more inclusivity, and so I need to say hey folks if I'm going to be informal like that. A couple of hints here for thinking about what you can do online. And remember, for those that have registered for this session, you will receive the link to our web accessibility audit or checklist that you can have a look at. But here's a couple of things to think about. So screen readers need to easily understand what is being linked to. So like we talked about, not writing click here, put some descriptive or some instructional text there so that it's actually more understandable that you're clicking through to something. Use alternative text, so the alt text for any images. I just gave an example here that I would use something like, if there was a picture of me with a picture of an umbrella plant behind me, I don't know why, I think because I've got an umbrella plant here, that's why I put that. That makes it more visual. People can visualize that more. And also the good news is that that helps to increase search engine discoverability and optimization as well. Keep wording general to be understood by as many people as possible, even if you're within your niche. Write to the reading level of your audience. Actually, when I do user guides and maybe some training I might be doing, I do talk as if I'm talking to children, because actually I want to make sure that the language that I'm talking is clear and concise, but also because the training sessions that we do, like for example, I did a training session to a few hundred Chinese editors last week. It's making sure that they can clearly understand what I'm talking about. And actually, just thinking about that, when I was pulling the content for that together, one of the things when you're working with when you're going to be presenting to an audience where maybe English isn't their first language, is that a lot more text on the screen, even though for me that's not how I present, but a lot more text on the screen can be very helpful, because if I suddenly talk too fast, they're able to easily understand me by reading what's on the screen. We talked about just avoiding specific expressions and jargon. I'm going to give you some examples of that. And then the images, just to touch on this again, that you have the imagery that you use, just need to make sure that it resonates, that it is applicable to your audience that you want to communicate with. Okay, so here is some regional examples. Now, most of these that I've got here are very UK centric. Pull a blinder, Bob's your uncle, it's just a ballpark figure. You've made a dog's dinner of that, full of beans, wind your neck in, it should be a piece of cake, blind drunk. I mean, you know, if we look at some of those, some of them could be a bit offensive. There was one I took off here actually that I did think was a bit offensive. So some of these could be seen as a bit offensive. Some of them, when you're working with people and communicating with people from different nationalities, they may be like, what? And also, you know, it's thinking about how words may translate. And you may not be an expert in understanding what's going to translate globally. This is about thinking about writing more globally. But here are a couple of examples at the bottom. So in the UK, for example, a rubber is an eraser, but a rubber in the US is a condom. Flip-flops, well, in Australia, they're thongs, but a thong in the UK is underwear. Pants in the UK, knickers, but in the US, they're trousers. So it's thinking about how can you write more globally. If you're, one of the best ways that I found in the past is if I'm pulling something specific together, I can just touch base with an American colleague or someone in a specific region and say, does this translate well, especially in Asia Pacific region. Okay, so I'm going to give you some visual examples now. Dear Public Library System, we hope you use some of the $12 million taxes in hotel taxes to keep the library open later. Love, Airbnb. I don't think I need to say anything about that. I think that's a bit. Today is the day we take the stairs, clearly. Spike your best friend's eggnog when they're not looking. I mean, honestly, you've got to wonder how where some of these have actually got through. I found this on someone's web page. They've done all these examples. It was brilliant. Alex. Here's another one. Come a little closer. Funeral services in Germany. I mean, and then another one is you can pronounce GIF however you'd like. Now, I have to say that when I saw this, I was like, do people pronounce GIF in lots of different ways? Fascinating. We'd love to be sitting on your face, Ray-Band. I mean, honestly, some of these. I take a sheet in the pool. Sheets, energy strips. I mean, and then the last one I want to show you is a bit more positive. So this is just an example of Speedo, and in their tone of voice, inclusion is part of one of their main campaign elements. And so they have a specific strategy here is we make sure to include everybody and anybody drawn to water. So you can see here represented on their visual screenshot that we've got here is that all the modeler and influencer briefs are always for different genders, ages, ethnicities, and sizes. So hopefully their imagery will resonate with a wider, broader audience. Okay, so this is a quick webinar today in the respect that normally they're about 50, 60 minutes long, and today we're running about 35. So if you do have any questions or queries, please do let us know. Pop it into the chat box. I can see that people are actually starting to add them in now. If I can't answer them for you right now, then I will pick up with you directly. So familiarize yourself with the social model of disability. You may feel that from this session, and you do get access to this session on demand. It goes into our YouTube channel. We're currently looking at where we can place it, so our Asia Pacific colleagues can take advantage of this free content that we do as well. So you may feel that what we've talked about today gives you a rounded enough idea. Look at examples of ableist language. So where maybe could you start thinking about changing your language already? Relook at your existing language that you're looking at the moment. How can you make it more inclusive? If you already have personas and you've done this for your audience, or maybe you want to develop personas, just make sure that you're including more diverse characteristics and be thinking beyond people's ethnic backgrounds as well. Update or craft your tone of voice to have more inclusive language. You'll find many organizations now do have a tone of voice guide, which is super helpful. But if you do have that, maybe go and have a look at it and see what kind of inclusive language do you see, or maybe that's something that needs addressing. Be impactful and make sure that you resonate. Be clear and concise in your language. Think person first. And I think for me, that's probably one of the biggest take homes today. But certainly also thinking about the mindset change when you're looking at a social model of disability and thinking about the medical model of disability. And just ultimately be accessible and make sure that your content is accessible. And where you can be compliant and test. So in the web accessibility checklist that we have online, what the first thing that we say in that checklist is that you need to check on how compliant you're being. You also need to be looking at first is to see what legislation you're bound by. There are a number of web accessibility legislations out there. It's the law. So I touched on the Art of Storytelling Masterclass. We'll include a link to this in the email that you will get after this session. The other things that I just want to highlight to you is that we have a range of resources. We're forever building our resources. If there's anything that you want to see added in here, let us know. But on the left-hand side of the screen is a screenshot from the website, which shows the 7 key areas that we focus on, which have got lots of great free resources inside. And then on the right-hand side, I've got a visual here of our YouTube channel that we have started to add lots of content to. So do make sure that you go and subscribe to the channel. We've got lots of hints and tips in there as well. They're usually about 10 to 15 minutes long, and they're strategies in terms of looking at how you can optimize or how you can increase your impact on social channels. Reddit was one of my recent ones. WeChat was the latest, but Reddit, I absolutely love Reddit. And then we've got all the webinars that we do as well. They go into this YouTube channel, and we are, as I mentioned, looking to place this in a video channel that is also accessible to our colleagues in China, for example, as YouTube is banned. So we're going to look at the questions. Okay, so so in terms of what would you recommend using instead of click here, do you have any examples? So that's where you can have more instructional text. So rather than saying click here, you actually put what it is that you're linking through to. So if you are linking through to author guidelines or author support, then that is what is going to be your link. So make sure that the link, the text in the link relates to exactly what it is. And then the screen reader, for example, will say that it's a link, but they'll know what they're clicking through to. What methods would you recommend to use to better understand our audience and find out what specific language we should be using? Okay, so certainly personas are incredibly important in terms of how you should be better communicating to your specific target audience. That also allows you to clearly focus in your mind is who exactly you should be speaking to and how you should be speaking to them. As I mentioned before, write globally first. That's very important. Also, another method that you could do is if you pull together focus groups, make sure that you have a really diverse range of people, or specifically take the time to reach out to people from different backgrounds to make sure that you are getting a more well-rounded point of view. And of course, You know, when it comes to looking at doing surveys as well, you need more than 30 responses, ideally, as a sample size to get a clear idea to say this is going to help me in my strategic direction. Anything below that is more something that you should take with a pinch of salt to give you an idea. But usually they say 30 responses is a good sample size. Okay, so yeah, thanks so much. Had some really good feedback here, just to say, really insightful session, and someone's definitely going to start thinking about the language that they use. So thank you so much, everybody, for attending this session. If there's anything that we can help with at the International Bunch, please let us know. You will, if you've registered for this, get an email with some additional links. Do also go and check out our YouTube channel, because we'll include those links as well to the resources that Jason sent us, and also to ones that we've talked about in here. We'll include that in the YouTube live session. And yeah, thank you so much for attending. Really appreciate it, and hope you learned something new. So thanks so much.